The gray wolf materialized from the storm like death itself, yellow eyes fixed on 8-year-old Tyon as he stumbled through the Montana wilderness. Lightning split the black sky, illuminating the beast's bared fangs, and the terror etched on the boy's fever-flushed face. His mother, Ayasha, threw herself between them, clutching a jagged stone, her heart hammering with a terrible truth. If they died here, no one would ever know she was innocent. My grandmother's voice echoes in my mind, Ayasha thought desperately as the wolf circled them. Trust in truth, even when the world turns against you. But what good was truth if it died with them in this God-forsaken wilderness? Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, she could hear it, the distant thunder of hoofbeats growing closer. Chief Macoon's warriors sent to ensure their exile became execution. "Stay behind me, little warrior." She screamed over the howling wind, her voice hoarse from 3 days of running. The wolf lunged just as thunder crashed overhead. Ayasha drove the stone into its snout with desperate strength, sending the beast yelping into the night. She grabbed Tyon's trembling hand and ran again, her torn moccasins slipping on wet grass as they fled deeper into the hostile territory. 3 days ago, she had been Ayasha, granddaughter of the revered elder Ayana, keeper of ancient healing wisdom. Now she was a hunted fugitive, branded a traitor by the very people who had raised her. The accusation still burned in her mind like acid. "You sold our sacred winter hunting grounds to white settlers. For this betrayal, you and your son are cast out forever." But she had never spoken to white men, except in trade. She had never drawn any map. Yet Chief Macoons had held up what appeared to be her handwriting, showing their secret hunting valleys to the tribal council. The evidence seemed undeniable, but Ayasha knew with bone-deep certainty it was a lie. "Mama, I can't run anymore." Tyon gasped, his legs finally giving out. The fever that had been building for days now consumed his small body, his face burning despite the cold rain soaking through his buckskin shirt. Ayasha knelt beside him, her heart shattering at his suffering. My grandmother would know what to do, she thought. She always said the spirits test us not to break us, but to reveal our strength. But what strength could save them now? They had no food, no shelter, and winter was coming fast to this merciless land. Through the rain and darkness, a faint light flickered in the distance, the warm glow of a lantern in a ranch house window. White settlers, Ayasha realized, with a chill of fear. Approaching them meant risking bullets or worse. But Tyon was dying, and death from a settler's gun might be more merciful than freezing to death in the wilderness. She lifted her son's burning body and stumbled toward that distant promise of salvation, even as part of her wondered if she was walking them both toward their graves. Samuel Bishop was cleaning his old army colt when the wolves started their mournful chorus near his fence line. At 62, the weathered rancher had learned to read danger in the Montana night wolves. Howling this close to human habitation meant something was driving them to hunt desperately. He stepped onto his porch, revolver in hand, and peered into the storm-lashed darkness. What he saw made him lower his weapon in shock. A young Indian woman collapsed against his gate, clutching a small child to her chest. Rain streamed down her face like tears as she looked up at him with desperate, haunted eyes. "Please," she whispered in careful English, her voice barely audible above the storm. "My son. He's dying. I'll work for you, give you anything you want. Just help him." Samuel hesitated, his weathered finger hovering near the trigger. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to turn them away. Helping Indians, especially Blackfeet, who'd been raiding settler farms all summer, could mean death for him. His neighbors, the Hartwell brothers, led a vigilante group that showed no mercy to Indian sympathizers. But looking at the child's fevered face, Samuel remembered another boy who had died because of his fear and indecision. 5 years ago, during the brutal winter of 1868, his own son Michael had found a lost Crow child half frozen by their creek. Samuel had reluctantly let the boy warm himself before sending him away, terrified of what his neighbors might say. Hours later, They found the child dead in a snowbank, his small body frozen solid just 2 miles from their door. The guilt had eaten at Samuel ever since, made worse by losing Michael at Gettysburg, and his beloved wife Sarah, to the cholera that swept through their county 3 summers past. "Get inside, both of you," he said gruffly, holstering his weapon. Whatever consequences came from this decision, he could live with them easier than watching another child die on his property. Samuel carried Tayan into his modest ranch house, while Ayasha followed on unsteady legs. The sudden warmth hit her like a physical blow, and she nearly collapsed from the relief of it. Samuel laid the boy on his own bed, stoking the fire higher, while Ayasha stripped off Tayan's wet clothes with practiced efficiency and wrapped him in dry blankets. "What's his name?" Samuel asked, studying the child's flushed face and listening to the wheeze in his labored breathing. "Tayan. It means new moon in our language." Ayasha replied, smoothing her son's damp hair with infinite tenderness. "I'm Ayasha, little one, though I suppose I'm not so little anymore." She managed a weak smile despite her exhaustion. "Samuel Bishop. This is my ranch, or what's left of it, after 20 years of drought and cattle thieves." He gestured around the sparsely furnished room. "That boy's got lung fever. Bad case from the sound of it. I've got medicine in town, but it's a hard ride in this weather." "I'll pay you somehow," Ayasha said desperately. "I have nothing now, but I can work hard. I know horses and cattle. I can cook, mend clothes. Nobody's talking about payment, woman." Samuel interrupted, his gruff voice softening slightly. "Child needs help. That's all there is to it." He paused, studying her face in the flickering firelight. "You speak English better than half the whites in this territory. My grandmother made sure I learned your tongue properly. She said understanding our enemies might keep us alive someday." Ayasha's voice carried a bitter edge that made Samuel wince at the word enemies. "Smart woman, your grandmother. What brings you out here in weather like this?" He asked carefully, though he suspected the answer would be grim. Ayasha's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. "My tribe. They say I betrayed them. Sold our sacred hunting grounds to white settlers for silver." She shook her head angrily. "It's a lie, but the tribal council believed it. We were cast out 3 days ago to die." Samuel frowned deeply. Being cast out in October was a death sentence, and tribal leaders knew it. What kind of evidence convinced them you'd done such a thing? "A map," Ayasha said quietly, her hands trembling as she tucked the blanket around Tayan. "Drawn in my handwriting, showing our secret winter valleys, where our people have hunted for generations. They found it in a settler camp after a raid went wrong." She looked up at him with haunted eyes. "But I swear on my grandmother's spirit, I never drew such a map. I've never even spoken to white settlers except to trade horses for supplies." Something in her voice, a ring of absolute truth mixed with genuine confusion, convinced Samuel she was telling him the truth. In 20 years of frontier life, he'd learned to read lies in a person's eyes, and this woman showed only bewilderment and crushing betrayal. "You can rest in the barn tonight," he said finally. "It's warm and dry and safer if anyone comes calling unexpectedly. I'll ride to Clearwater first light for medicine and supplies." As Ayasha settled into the barn, with Tayan wrapped in Samuel's warmest blankets, she allowed herself the first real hope since their nightmare began. The white rancher's kindness surprised her most. Settlers would have shot them on sight, or worse. But she knew their danger was far from over. Chief McCoons wouldn't simply let them disappear into the wilderness. His warriors would come hunting to finish what exile had started. Dawn broke gray and forbidding as Samuel saddled his mare for the ride to Clearwater. The small frontier town served the scattered ranches across the territory, but it was also home to Jake Hartwell's vigilante group men, who'd appointed themselves the region's protectors against Indian raids and showed no mercy to anyone who sympathized with hostiles. At Miller's General Store, Samuel purchased fever powder laudanum for pain and canned peaches that might tempt a sick child to eat. But Mrs. Miller, the store owner's sharp-eyed wife, noticed his unusual selections with growing suspicion. "That's quite a lot of medicine for one man, Samuel," she commented while wrapping his purchases in brown paper. "You feeling poorly these days? Just stocking up for winter?" Samuel replied carefully, keeping his voice neutral. Never know when sickness might strike out here. But outside the store, he encountered the very man he'd hoped to avoid. Jake Hartwell stepped into his path, a thick-set man with cold blue eyes and a reputation for brutal violence. Jake led the local vigilante patrol and made no secret of his intention to drive every Indian from the territory by whatever means necessary. "I heard you were buying medicine, Bishop," Jake said with false friendliness, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Funny coincidence, we found some mighty interesting tracks near your place yesterday evening. Moccasin prints heading straight for your ranch like they knew exactly where they were going." Samuel kept his expression carefully blank. "Could be from anyone, Jake. Plenty of folks still wear Indian boots. They're practical for this rough country." "Maybe so," Jake said slowly, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "But with all the raids this summer and families getting murdered in their beds, we can't afford to be too trusting. Mind if me and the boys ride out later tonight, just to make sure you're not having any visitor problems that might endanger the whole community?" The threat was clear despite its neighborly phrasing. Samuel nodded stiffly, his jaw tight. "My ranch is always open to true friends, Jake. But I don't expect any trouble." "It's good to hear." Jake smiled without any warmth reaching his eyes. "Because trouble with Indians has a nasty habit of spreading like wildfire through dry grass. Burns everything in its path, if you catch my meaning." Samuel understood perfectly. He rode home with Jake's warning echoing ominously in his mind, knowing he was walking a razor's edge between conscience and survival. The medicine worked slowly over the next 2 days. Tayon's fever broke in stages, and his breathing gradually eased, though he remained weak and barely able to keep down the thin broths Ayasha prepared. She proved invaluable around the ranch, helping with daily chores despite her exhaustion, and showing surprising knowledge of horses and cattle that impressed even experienced Samuel. "Where did you learn so much about livestock?" he asked, as she expertly treated a cut on his mare's leg with a poultice made from plants she'd gathered along the creek. "My grandmother traded with white ranchers sometimes before the troubles got so bad." Ayasha explained, her skilled hands gentle on the injured animal. "She said we must understand both worlds if we hope to survive in either one. Some of our young men worked on white ranches during harvest season, learning your ways while earning silver for winter supplies. What troubles changed all that?" Samuel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Ayasha's face clouded with remembered pain. "Chief Macoons preaches that whites will never stop taking our land, so we must drive you out completely or die fighting like warriors. My grandmother disagreed. She believed there had to be ways for both peoples to share this vast territory. That disagreement made her an enemy in Macoon's eyes. Is that why he accused you of betrayal?" "Perhaps," Ayasha said quietly, her voice heavy with grief. "After grandmother passed 2 winters ago, some of our people began listening to my words instead of blindly following his warpath. Macoons didn't appreciate having his authority questioned, especially by a woman." She paused, studying Samuel's weathered, honest face. "Why do you help us? Your own people will hate you for it when they find out." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking his mare's neck. "Had a son once. Name was Michael. During the harsh winter of '68, he found a crow boy half frozen by our creek. I let the child warm himself by our fire, then sent him away because I was terrified of what the neighbors might say." His voice grew rough with old pain. We found that boy dead in the snow the next morning, frozen solid just 2 miles from our door. Been carrying that shame ever since. Maybe helping you and your son is the Lord's way of giving me a chance to balance those scales." That evening, their fragile peace shattered like glass. Samuel was checking his cattle in the north pasture when he heard the unmistakable thunder of the multiple horses riding hard toward his ranch. Through the gathering dusk, he spotted riders silhouetted against the darkening sky, Jake Hartwell, and at least 5 other vigilantes, all heavily armed and moving with deadly purpose. He sprinted toward the barn where Ayasha was coaxing Tyon to take more broth. "Riders coming fast," he said urgently, his breathing labored from the run. "Hide in the back stall behind those hay bales. Whatever happens out there, don't make a sound." Ayasha's eyes went wide with terror. But she gathered Tyon in her arms and melted into the shadows, just as the vigilantes thundered into his yard like an approaching storm. "Evening, Samuel," Jake called out with false cheerfulness, dismounting with his rifle held ready. "Time for that neighborly visit we discussed in town." "No visitors here tonight, Jake," Samuel replied, stepping out to meet them with forced calm. "Just me and my cattle, same as always." "That's mighty strange," said Tom Hartwell, Jake's younger brother, dismounting and spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Because we followed those moccasin tracks right to your front gate. Fresh ones, too, couldn't be more than a day or 2 old. Rukyast, like I told you in town, could be anyone's tracks." Samuel maintained, though his palms were growing damp with sweat, as the armed men spread out around his property like wolves surrounding prey. Jake's eyes narrowed dangerously in the lantern light. "You wouldn't lie to your neighbors, would you, Samuel? Because harboring hostile Indians is a hanging offense in these parts. The kind that gets a man's ranch burned to the ground and his neck stretched from the nearest tree." "I'm not harboring anyone," Samuel said firmly, meeting Jake's cold stare. "But you're welcome to look around if it'll set your minds at ease." The vigilantes searched his property with methodical thoroughness, checking every building shadow and hiding place they could think of. In the barn, Samuel held his breath and prayed silently as Jake's lantern light swept dangerously close to Ayasha's hiding place behind the stacked hay bales. But the shadows held their secret, and after several tense minutes that felt like hours, the vigilantes regrouped in his yard. "Must have been coyotes after all," Samuel said, pointing to some genuine animal tracks near the barn entrance. "They've been getting bold lately, coming right up to the buildings looking for food." Jake studied him with obvious suspicion for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Maybe so, Bishop. But we'll be keeping a real close watch on this area from now on. Any sign of Indian trouble, any sign at all, and we'll be back here with fire and rope. You can count on that promise." As the riders disappeared into the darkness, their hoofbeats fading gradually into the night, Ayasha emerged from hiding with Tyon still clutched in her arms. "I'm putting you in terrible danger," she whispered, guilt and fear warring in her voice. "We should leave tonight before they come back." "A boy's still too sick for hard travel," Samuel replied, though he couldn't hide his own worry. "Besides, where would you go? Your own people cast you out to die, and every white settler for 100 miles would shoot you on sight." "Then we're truly trapped," Ayasha said, despair creeping into her voice like poison. But their problems were about to multiply beyond anything they could have imagined. The next morning brought a different threat entirely. Samuel was drawing water from his well when a lone rider appeared on the eastern ridge, a Blackfeet warrior mounted on a striking paint horse studying his ranch with the predatory intensity of a hunting eagle. After several long minutes of observation, the warrior rode down into the valley with measured purpose. Samuel met him in the yard, his hand resting on his revolver. The warrior was young, perhaps 30, with a lean, powerful build and alert eyes of a seasoned fighter. Ritual scars marked his high cheekbones, and eagle feathers adorned his long black hair. There was something familiar about his features that Samuel couldn't quite place. "I am Kale," the warrior said in clear, precise English. "I seek the woman Ayasha and the boy Tyan." Samuel's blood turned to ice water. "Don't know anyone by those names." Kale's dark eyes hardened like flint. "Do not insult my intelligence, white man. Their trail ends at this place and goes no further." He shifted his rifle meaningfully across his saddle. "Chief Macoons has reconsidered their punishment. Exile was insufficient for such betrayal. They're not here." Samuel maintained, though his voice lacked conviction even to his own ears. "Then you will not object if I search your buildings," Kyle said, beginning to dismount. As he did, Samuel caught glimpses of movement on the surrounding ridges, more warriors, at least 6 of them positioned strategically to prevent any escape. At that crucial moment, Ayasha stepped from the barn with quiet dignity, Tyan clinging to her side. Her face was pale but determined, and Samuel noticed something he hadn't seen before. A subtle resemblance between her and the young warrior. "I'm here, Kyle," she said softly. "What does our chief want with us now?" Kale's stoic mask slipped for just an instant, revealing something that looked almost like pain. "Cousin," he said quietly, using the Blackfeet word. "The council has decided your punishment was inadequate for your crimes." Cousin Samuel realized with growing understanding. That's why he looks familiar. They share the same high cheekbones, the same proud bearing. "What crimes?" Samuel demanded, stepping protectively between them. "What is she supposed to have done that's so terrible?" She revealed the location of our sacred winter hunting grounds to white settlers. Kale replied, though his voice carried less conviction than his words suggested. "Because of her treachery, our people will starve when the deep snows come. Such betrayal demands blood payment." Ayasha began desperately. The evidence was found. Kyle interrupted, but Samuel noticed the young warrior's hands trembling slightly. "A map drawn in your handwriting showing valleys our ancestors kept secret for generations. The tribal elders examined it themselves." Samuel studied Kale's face carefully, noting the doubt flickering in his dark eyes, despite his harsh words. "You don't believe she's guilty?" he said suddenly. Kale's jaw tightened visibly. "My beliefs are irrelevant. I follow orders." "Since when do Blackfeet warriors follow orders they know in their hearts are wrong?" Ayasha challenged her voice, gaining strength. "Kyle, you've known me since we were children playing by the river. Do you truly believe I would betray our people for white man's silver?" For a moment, the warrior's composed mask cracked completely, showing the inner conflict tearing at him. The evidence seemed clear, cousin. Your handwriting was on that map. Could be forged." Samuel interrupted, his mind racing. "Handwriting can be copied, especially if someone had access to samples and wanted to frame an innocent person." Kale's eyes flashed with something surprise, then growing suspicion. Why would anyone forge such evidence? Maybe because she threatened someone's power, Samuel suggested carefully. Maybe because her grandmother's influence lived on through her, and that made certain people nervous. The seeds of doubt Samuel had planted began sprouting visibly in Kale's mind. He had served Chief Macoons faithfully for 5 years, but he'd also watched the leader grow increasingly paranoid and ruthless. Respected elders who dared question Macoons' aggressive policies had mysteriously fallen from favor or faced sudden accusations of disloyalty. Could his own cousin be another victim of the chief's consolidation of power? "The chief said you confessed your guilt before the council," Kyle said slowly, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "I confessed nothing because I'm guilty of nothing," Ayasha replied firmly. "I demanded to face my accusers and examine this supposed evidence, but Macoons refused. He said my guilt was already proven beyond question." Before anyone could speak further, a new smell reached them on the evening breeze, the acrid scent of burning wheat. Fire! Samuel shouted, pointing toward his fields, where orange flames were already racing across the dry stalks, pushed by the wind into a roaring wall of destruction. Through the thickening smoke, he could see mounted figures at the edge of his property. Jake Hartwell and his vigilantes, who had been watching from a distance and decided to take direct action. Indians on Bishop's Place. Jake's voice carried across the flames like a battle cry. Burn them out before they can escape. The wheat fire spread with terrifying speed, creating an advancing wall of flame that began consuming everything in its path. The Blackfeet warriors positioned on the ridges immediately opened fire on the vigilantes, who returned shots from behind whatever cover they could find. Samuel found himself trapped in the middle of a three-way battle with bullets whistling overhead and flames devouring his life's work. Cale grabbed his rifle and began firing at the vigilantes, apparently deciding that white men burning Indian women and children alive was a greater crime than harboring tribal exiles. "Get to the creek," he shouted over the gunfire. The water might stop the flames, but the creek lay on the far side of the burning fields, and the vigilantes had positioned themselves to control that escape route. Samuel could see Jake Hartwell directing his men to cut off any path to safety, clearly intending to kill everyone on the ranch, and later claim they died fighting off a dangerous Indian raid. The barn caught fire as wind-blown sparks landed on its dry wooden roof. Samuel grabbed Ayasha and Tyon, pulling them toward the house, but flames had already spread to engulf the front porch. They were surrounded by fire on three sides, with armed enemies controlling the fourth direction. "We're trapped!" Ayasha cried, pressing Tyon's face against her shoulder to shield him from the sight of approaching death. In that moment of absolute desperation, Tyon stumbled and fell his small leather pouch, a treasured keepsake from his great-grandmother that he carried everywhere for comfort, tumbling from his tiny hands to hit the hard ground. The old pouch, worn thin by years of handling, split along a carefully sewn seam that had been weakened by their days of hard travel. Several precious items scattered in the dirt, a small carved bear, some colorful stones, and something that made Ayasha gasp in complete shock, a piece of carefully prepared hide, folded many times and sewn shut with sinew thread. She had never seen it before in her life. A grandmother's secret. Tyon whispered through his fever the words he'd been mumbling deliriously for days, finally making sense. She said, "Keep safe. For the right moment." With trembling hands, Ayasha picked up the mysterious hide and carefully opened it, her heart pounding with sudden hope. What she found inside changed everything they thought they knew. It was indeed a map, but not of hunting grounds. Instead, it detailed the locations of sacred Blackfeet spiritual sites, burial grounds, vision quest locations, ceremonial valleys, considered too holy for any outsider to know about. The map was drawn in her grandmother's distinctive, careful handwriting, the same precise style Ayana had used when recording tribal histories and sacred stories for future generations. But this spiritual map was completely different from the hunting grounds map that Chief McCoons had claimed she gave to settlers. The sacred sites shown here were in entirely different locations, many miles away from the winter hunting valleys that provided food for their people during the harsh months. He framed me. Ayasha whispered the full scope of the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. McCoons created a false map and claimed I drew it. The pieces of a horrible puzzle suddenly clicked together in her mind. Her grandmother had been far more than just a respected elder. She had been a keeper of sacred knowledge, and the strongest voice opposing McCoon's increasingly aggressive war policies. As tensions with white settlers escalated, Ayana had consistently advocated for careful diplomacy rather than the total warfare the chief favored. After her grandmother's death, Ayasha had gradually begun expressing similar moderate views among the tribal women, sharing Ayana's wisdom and promoting her peaceful approach to resolving conflicts. This had put her directly at odds with Chief McCoons, who saw her growing influence as a dangerous threat to his authority and his plans for war. Now look at this Cale. Ayasha shouted over the roar of flames and gunfire, holding up the authentic map. "This proves my innocence. The hunting grounds Macoons claimed I revealed are nowhere near these sacred sites. He used a forgery to destroy me." Kale stared at the spiritual map, his warrior's honor warring desperately with his loyalty to his chief. He had seen the hunting grounds map Macoons showed to the tribal council, and this sacred sites map was completely different. Different locations, different handwriting, different purpose entirely. "This is your grandmother's work," he said slowly, recognition dawning in his voice. "I've seen her symbols in the tribal histories she kept. But the hunting map showed valleys where our people have hunted for countless generations. Because Macoons drew that map himself," Ayasha said bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "He needed evidence of betrayal that didn't exist, so he forged it. My grandmother's influence threatened his power, and after she died, I became his target. But there was no time to fully process this revelation. A vigilante burst through the smoke rifle, aimed directly at Tyan. Ayasha screamed and grabbed a burning branch from the spreading fire, charging the man with the desperate fury of a mother protecting her child. Her flaming weapon struck his face, sending him shrieking and rolling in the dirt to extinguish his burning hair. Samuel, inspired by her incredible courage, returned fire at other vigilantes, while helping Kale drag Tyan toward their only possible escape. A narrow gap between the burning barn and a blazing haystack. Bullets whistled around them like deadly hornets as they ran, and Samuel felt one graze his shoulder, spinning him around, but not dropping him to the ground. "This way." Kyle shouted his intimate knowledge of the terrain, guiding them toward a small ravine where a stream provided both water and cover from the continuing gunfire. They burst through the wall of smoke and flame, half blinded and choking on the acrid air that filled their lungs. Behind them, Samuel's ranch house collapsed in a thunderous roar of destruction, 20 years of his life reduced to ash and glowing embers in a matter of minutes. But they were alive, and given the circumstances of the past hour that seemed nothing short of miraculous. In the blessed safety of the ravine, Samuel pressed his shirt against his wounded shoulder, while Ayasha used strips torn from her dress to bandage the injury with skilled hands. Tyan, exhausted by the terrifying ordeal, clung to his mother and wept quietly against her chest. "Enter my home," Samuel said, watching the flames consume everything he owned. 20 years of work all gone. "I'm so sorry," Ayasha whispered, guilt crushing her heart. "This is my fault. If we hadn't come to you—" "No." Samuel interrupted, firmly, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "Those men chose to burn my ranch rather than show Christian mercy to a woman and child. That evil is on them, not you." Kale examined the spiritual map. By the flickering light of the distant fires, his face grim as he compared it to his vivid memories of the hunting grounds map Chief Macoons had displayed to the tribal council with such conviction. "No, this is definitely your grandmother's work," he said finally, his voice heavy with growing realization. "I recognize her symbols from the sacred stories she recorded. But the hunting map showed completely different territories, valleys where our people have gathered food for generations beyond memory. Because he drew that hunting map himself to frame me." Ayasha said, her voice filled with bitter understanding. "Macoons needed to eliminate me as a political rival, so he created evidence that didn't exist. My grandmother's growing influence had threatened his authority, and after she died, I inherited that threat." Kyle was silent for a long moment, processing this information and its terrible implications. As one of Macoon's most trusted warriors, he had witnessed the chief's increasing paranoia over the past 2 years. Respected elders who dared question his policies had faced exile, mysterious accidents, or sudden accusations of disloyalty. Framing Ayasha for betrayal would serve multiple purposes, removing a dangerous political rival while justifying even harsher measures against white encroachment. "If this is true," Kale said slowly, his voice thick with horror, then unspeakable injustice has been done to my own family. Oh, will you help us prove it? Ayasha asked desperately, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in days. Before Kale could answer, the sound of approaching horses made them all freeze in terror. But these riders moved with measured purpose, rather than the wild charge of vigilantes or warriors. Through the smoke and failing light, they could see the glint of a badge on the lead rider's vest. Sheriff William Hayes had spotted the massive fire from town and ridden out immediately with 3 deputies to investigate the obvious emergency. What he found was complete devastation. Bishop's ranch burned to the ground, several men dead or wounded, and clear evidence of a large-scale gun battle. Samuel Bishop. Hayes called out into the smoky darkness. You alive out there? Samuel stood cautiously from the ravine, his hands clearly visible. Here, Sheriff. I've had much better days. Hayes dismounted and approached carefully, his hand resting on his weapon, but not drawing it. He was known throughout the territory as a fair man who upheld the law regardless of which side it favored in any conflict. When he saw Ayasha, Tayan, and Kale, his eyebrows rose in surprise, but he showed no immediate hostility. Looks like you folks have quite a story to tell, Hayes said calmly. Jake Hartwell's claiming you were harboring hostile Indians and attacked his men when they tried to make a lawful arrest. Jake burned my ranch and tried to murder a woman and child. Samuel replied angrily, his voice rough from smoke inhalation. That's arson and attempted murder last time I checked the territorial law books. Those are serious accusations against prominent citizens, Hayes said carefully. He looked directly at Ayasha with genuine curiosity. What's your side of the situation? Ayasha stepped forward with dignity, still clutching her grandmother's precious map. Sheriff, I can prove that I was falsely accused by my own tribal chief. This map shows that he framed me to cover his own crimes and consolidate his power. I've seen too many injustices in this territory to ignore evidence when it's presented honestly. Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of years spent trying to maintain law and order in a lawless land. Let's hear your full story. For the next hour, as the ranch fires died down to smoldering ruins that glowed like fallen stars, Ayasha explained the entire situation in careful detail. She showed Sheriff Hayes the authentic spiritual map, described her grandmother's role as a tribal moderator who had opposed Chief McCoon's war policies, and detailed how the chief had used forged evidence to justify her exile and planned execution. Kale, despite his lifelong loyalty to his people, confirmed many crucial details of her account. His warrior's honor simply wouldn't allow him to support lies, even if they came from his own chief and even if the truth brought pain to his heart. Sheriff Hayes examined the evidence with the careful attention of a man who had spent years learning to separate truth from deception. He had dealt with tribal politics before and knew that internal power struggles often led to false accusations and unjust punishments. The hide map was clearly authentic, the type of painstaking work that took years to complete properly, and its content bore no resemblance to hunting grounds that could possibly benefit white settlers. This is a complex situation with implications far beyond my immediate jurisdiction, Hayes said finally. But I'm strongly inclined to believe your story. The question now is what we can do about correcting this injustice. I want to go home to my people. Ayasha said simply, her voice filled with longing. I want to clear my name and return to the life that was stolen from me. And I want to see justice done properly. Samuel added, his jaw set with determination. Jake Hartwell and his men committed serious crimes tonight. They need to answer for them under the law. Hayes nodded gravely. I'll arrest Hartwell's surviving men and charge them appropriately. As for your tribal situation, I can't force Chief McCoons to admit his lies, but I can certainly provide official testimony about this evidence, if it would help your case. That might be enough, Kale said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of difficult decisions. If the tribal elders see proof that the evidence was forged, they will demand the complete truth from Macoons. 3 days later, an unprecedented procession made its way slowly across the Montana plains toward the Blackfeet tribal lands. Sheriff Hayes rode at the front, his badge gleaming in the clear autumn sunlight. Behind him came Samuel Bishop, his arm still bound in a sling from his gunshot wound, but his eyes filled with quiet determination. Ayasha rode beside him, carrying Tayan on her horse, while Kale brought up the rear, prepared to face whatever consequences awaited him for his part in uncovering the truth. The tribal council meeting that followed would be remembered for generations. Before the assembled elders, Sheriff Hayes presented the evidence of Ayasha's complete innocence, the authentic spiritual map that proved beyond any doubt that Chief Macoons had used forged documents to frame an innocent woman and child. Kajal, risking his own position within the tribe and possibly his life, testified courageously about the inconsistencies he had observed and his growing doubts about the chief's version of events. Confronted with overwhelming evidence of his deception, Chief Macoons attempted to brazenly weather the storm, claiming that white testimony was worthless in tribal matters and demanding that tribal justice be decided exclusively by tribal members. But the elders had seen both maps with their own eyes, heard the testimony from multiple sources, and recognized the truth when it was laid out clearly before them. Elder Joseph, the oldest member of the council and a contemporary of Ayasha's beloved grandmother, spoke for the entire group with the authority of his years. Great wrong has been done to one of our own people. Ayasha, daughter of the wise Ayana. You are welcomed back to your people with honor and respect. Your exile is officially ended, and your name is cleared of all false accusations. As for Chief Macoons, his fate was swift and final. Stripped of his leadership position for bringing false accusations and corrupting tribal justice, he was himself exiled from the tribe, the very punishment he had unjustly inflicted on an innocent woman and child. But Ayasha's moment of complete vindication carried a bittersweet quality that surprised everyone present. Standing before the people who had cast her out in ignorance, holding Tayan's small hand and feeling the weight of their sincere apologies and restored acceptance, she realized that something fundamental had changed within her heart during their weeks of exile and struggle. I am deeply grateful for this justice, she told the assembled council with quiet dignity. But I find that I cannot simply return to my old life as if nothing has happened. Surprised murmurs rippled through the gathering, and Elder Joseph asked with genuine confusion, "Why would you choose to leave when your rightful place among us has been restored with honor?" Ayasha looked back at Samuel, who stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, with his hat in his weathered hands and his entire future uncertain. "Because I've learned that home isn't just the place where you're born," she said, with growing conviction. "It's the place where people love you enough to sacrifice everything they have for your safety." This man lost his home, his livelihood, everything he had built over 20 years to protect my son and me when we were strangers to him. How can I abandon him now when he has nothing left? Samuel's eyes widened in complete surprise. "Ayasha, you don't owe me anything at all. Your rightful place is here with your own people." "My place," she said firmly, her voice carrying the strength of absolute certainty, "is with the people who have proven through their actions that they are truly my family." Blood and ancient traditions matter deeply, but so do loyalty, sacrifice, and love freely given. Tayan tugged at his mother's dress with childish innocence. "Does this mean Samuel gets to be my father now?" The simple question asked with such pure hope brought tears to several pairs of eyes around the circle. Samuel knelt down to the boy's level, his voice gentle with emotion. "If your mother agrees to it, and if you truly want me to be your father, then I would be honored beyond words to fill that role." Sheriff Hayes, who had been watching these proceedings with great interest and growing respect for all involved, cleared his throat diplomatically. "If you folks are looking for a fresh start away from all these painful memories, I might have a practical suggestion. There's good farming land available near Billings territory that's been properly surveyed and opened for legitimate homesteading. It's far enough from here to avoid the troubles of the past, but close enough to maintain friendships and connections. He looked meaningfully at Kyle, who had proven himself to be a man of genuine honor. This unexpected proposal sparked intense discussion among the tribal elders. The situation was unprecedented in their experience, but the extraordinary circumstances seemed to call for extraordinary solutions. In the end, they reached a decision that honored both tradition and the unique bonds that had been forged through suffering and sacrifice. Ayasha would be granted the right to leave with their complete blessing, maintaining her tribal membership and her connection to her people while building a new life that bridged both worlds. It was a compromise that honored ancient traditions while acknowledging the reality of what had happened to change all their lives. As autumn gave way to the harsh Montana winter, a small but thriving homestead took shape in a protected valley near Billings. Samuel's hard-earned skills as a rancher, combined with Ayasha's deep knowledge of the land and its secrets, and Tayon's eager enthusiasm to help with every task, created a successful farm that served as a bridge between two very different worlds. The house they built together was modest but sturdy, with a large stone fireplace, where they gathered every evening to share stories of their different backgrounds and make plans for the days ahead. Samuel found himself learning Blackfeet customs, language, and wisdom, while Ayasha and Tayon adapted to settler ways of farming and living in harmony with their white neighbors. It was a blending of cultures that enriched and strengthened all their lives. Sheriff Hayes kept his solemn word about Jake Hartwell and his vigilante followers. Those who survived the ranch fire were arrested, tried, and convicted of arson and attempted murder. Hartwell himself received 10 years in the territorial prison, sending a clear message throughout the region that vigilante justice would not be tolerated under legitimate law and order. On Christmas Eve, 1873, as snow fell softly outside their warm new home, Samuel and Ayasha were married in a simple but deeply meaningful ceremony, performed by the circuit preacher. Kyle served as witness and Tayon as ring-bearer, his face glowing with happiness at finally having a complete family. Their union was born not of passionate romance, but of mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds forged in survival's harsh crucible. The precious spiritual map that had saved Ayasha's life and proven her innocence found a place of honor above their fireplace, a constant reminder of the grandmother whose wisdom and foresight had ultimately saved them all. But more than that, it represented the enduring truth that justice, though sometimes long delayed, can still prevail when good people have the courage to stand together against injustice and lies. As the years passed peacefully, their unusual family became a symbol throughout the territory of what was possible when prejudice gave way to understanding, when fear was replaced by compassion, and when people chose love over hatred. Tayon grew into a strong, confident young man who moved easily between both worlds, carrying forward the best traditions and values of both cultures into an uncertain future. Samuel never once regretted the ranch he had lost or the old life he had left behind. In Ayasha and Tayon, he found something infinitely more valuable than land or cattle. He found redemption for the child he had failed to save years before, and a family that had chosen him as completely as he had chosen them. And Ayasha, who had lost everything she thought mattered in the cruel injustice of false exile, discovered that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you truly need to build a meaningful life. In the ashes of betrayal and false accusation, she found justice and vindication. In the kindness of a stranger who became family, she found unconditional love. And in the courage to start completely over, she found the strength to build something beautiful, lasting, and true. The Montana Territory remained a harsh and often unforgiving place. But for one small family in a valley near Billings, it had become home in the truest and most complete sense of the word. Not just a place marked on a surveyor's map, but a place where love had triumphed over hate, where justice had defeated injustice, and where three lost souls had found each other against all the odds that fate and human cruelty could devise against them.